Okay, let's talk about the absolute seismic shift that's happening right now in the AI landscape. You've probably seen all the back and forth between the big US frontier models recently, right? Well, just a few weeks ago, a wildly disruptive release dropped out of nowhere and put immense pressure on those exact US giants. We are talking about GLM 5.2, a free Chinese AI model that is literally giving Silicon Valley a panic attack. This thing is nearly as good at coding as Claude Opus, actually beats GPT 5.5 on a few key benchmarks, and costs roughly a tenth of what the major US models charge. Oh, and the best part? You can download the entire thing for free and just run it yourself. Seriously, the reaction across the tech industry has been totally explosive. If you look at the tech press right now, this is hands down the single most covered AI story in our space. It's actively being described as causing deep concern in the West and giving Silicon Valley, quote, major FOMO. And there's a really intense mix of excitement and straight-up industry panic surrounding this release, basically because it completely upends the pricing and accessibility models that we've all just kind of gotten used to. So we have to stop and ask, is GLM 5.2 actually worth all this panic? Well, in this explainer, we're going to take an objective, strictly data-driven approach. We're going to cut right through the hype and figure out exactly what this means for you, whether you're an operator, a developer, or a business owner. All right, first up, let's look at what actually happened with this massive release from Z.ai. So back on June 16, 2026, the Chinese AI lab Z.ai officially deployed GLM 5.2 to the public. And this wasn't just some research paper or a closed beta, right? This was a full-blown deployment. And guys, this thing is massive. We're talking 744 billion total parameters. But here's the clever part. Because it uses a highly efficient mixture of experts architecture, it only actually activates about 40 billion parameters per token generated. So that makes it incredibly fast and efficient to run compared to dense models of the same size. Plus, you throw in a massive 1 million token context window, and it's suddenly going toe-to-toe with heavyweights like Claude. But honestly, the architecture isn't even the most disruptive part of this whole thing. GLM 5.2 was released under a genuinely unrestricted MIT open source license. If you're a solo operator, a developer, or running a business, this means absolute freedom. You can literally go to Hugging Face right now, download the full model weights, run it entirely on your own hardware, and modify it however you want for your specific use case. And you can do all of this with zero licensing fees. So you aren't just renting access from a megacorp, you have the actual model weights sitting right there in your hands. Now, having a free model is awesome, but let's be real, it only matters if it can actually do the work. Let's look at the actual benchmark numbers. So how does it stack up against the heavy-hitting US frontier models? Well, take a look at SweBench Pro. This is a highly demanding, real-world coding test. GLM 5.2 scores a 62.1. It actually pulls ahead of the proprietary GPT 5.5, which sits at 58.6. Think about that for a second. A free open-weight model is outperforming a top-tier proprietary model on really complex software engineering tasks. Wild, right? And honestly, the margins get even tighter. On the Frontier SWE benchmark, which is another super rigorous test of capability, GLM 5.2 hits a 74.4. That means it is trailing Claude Opus 4.8 score of 75.1 by less than a single point. And in the world of AI benchmarking, a gap of less than 1 point basically means these two models are functionally tied. But then we hit this absolute standout score, 81.0. This is GLM 5.2's outright win on Terminal Bench 2.1. For context, this specific benchmark tests a model's ability to use agentic tools and operate within terminal environments. Scoring an 81.0 here absolutely proves its immense strength in agentic automation workflows. It makes this model just incredibly powerful for developers who are building out autonomous AI agents. Now, we do need to be completely objective here and super clear about where the actual boundaries are, because GLM 5.2 is not a magical replacement for everything. While it absolutely dominates in coding and agentic tool use, the reality is that the US models still firmly hold their ground in other areas. Gemini 3.1 Pro still wins out on abstract reasoning and scientific benchmarks. GPT 5.4 leads on structured reasoning and computer use tasks. And Claude? Well, Claude definitely still maintains a very real edge when it comes to nuanced writing. So GLM 5.2 is shockingly close in specific categories, but it definitely doesn't take the crown everywhere. Okay, let's pivot to what's really keeping Silicon Valley executives up at night, the massive cost disruption. This brings us to the most fundamentally disruptive element of this entire release, the economics. This is what's actually fueling that Silicon Valley panic, especially for high-volume users. If you use Z.ai's API, their pricing is a jaw-dropping $1.40 per million input tokens, and just $4.40 for output. To truly grasp why those numbers are such a huge deal, let's look at a direct cost comparison. We've got Claude Opus sitting at roughly $10 for input and $50 for output per million tokens. GPT 5.5 is at $5 and $30. And then you have GLM 5.2 way down at $1.40 and $4.40. You are looking at a model that benchmarks within a single point of its rivals, but costs roughly a sixth to a tenth of the price. If you're running any kind of meaningful daily AI volume, this represents a completely new, fundamentally different cost structure for your business operations. And the most crucial point is this. For the ultimate high-volume operator, the API price isn't even the end of the story. Because GLM 5.2 is fully open weight, you can just self-host it. And when you self-host, you achieve a totally different economic reality, a true zero marginal cost. Think about it. Once your hardware is up and running, generating 1,000 tokens or 1,000,000 tokens costs you exactly the same in licensing fees, which is absolutely zero. You're getting frontier-level coding capabilities at local AI economics. It's a total game changer. But all right, let's pump the brakes for a second and talk about the honest limits and real risks here. Because before you go and switch your entire production stack overnight, we definitely need a grounded reality check. Let's explicitly lay out the catches. First up, open weight does not mean easy setup. Running 744 billion parameters requires massive compute power. Seriously, please don't try to run this on your everyday laptop unless you want to melt a hole in your desk. Second, like we established earlier, there are measurable benchmark gaps. If your workflows rely heavily on complex abstract logic or really nuanced writing, GLM 5.2 is going to trail behind. And third, and we have to address this directly, using a hosted Chinese API raises very real evolving data residency and business compliance questions. If your business has strict data governance requirements, you really have to ask whose servers your data is ultimately sitting on. However, there is a fascinating and entirely legal workaround to that specific risk. We can call it the self-hosting loophole. By utilizing that unrestricted MIT open weight license to completely self-host the model on your own secure servers, you effectively bypass those data residency risks altogether. The data literally never leaves your infrastructure, which pretty neatly solves the compliance questions surrounding foreign-hosted APIs. So bringing all of this together, what's the bottom line? Should you actually make the switch? When we look at the data, the massive cost savings, and the practical limits, the answer really depends entirely on your specific tasks. My advice, you should absolutely rigorously test GLM 5.2 if you're doing high-volume coding or agentic automation workflows. The benchmark gap is just so incredibly close in those areas that the massive cost savings alone dictate you should be using it. On the flip side, though, definitely stick with the major US models for deep, nuanced writing, complex abstract reasoning, or any multimodal tasks. The frontier US models still hold a real, measurable edge there, and for those specific use cases, it is absolutely worth paying a premium. We are witnessing a massive democratization of frontier-level capabilities right now, and the market is shifting faster than it ever has before. So I really want to hear from you directly as we navigate all these crazy changes together. Have you actually downloaded or tried the GLM 5.2 API yet? And if you have, what exact workflows are you using it to automate? Jump in and share your hands-on experiences, because that's how we're all going to keep learning to build faster and smarter.